definitely a like I said in the tweet, it's a bold decision, kind of astounding that they were wanting to gamble in this fashion. But if they get the quarterback right, even if it takes a few years, no one's gonna be mad in 2 years. No one's gonna care. If they miss on Penix and then they never really do much with Kirk, then they're gonna be fired by the time Penix plays. So
yeah,
they got to win over the next 2 years, or they're not even gonna see Penix. So that's probably what Kirk's about.
I believe the line between bold and bullshit is very, very thin. What the hell are the Atlanta Falcons doing? I don't know. So I had to ask Kevin Knight of the Falcoholic. We got him out of hiding after weeks of coping to talk about the Atlanta Falcons offseason on the Franchise Focus series at FantasyPoints. If you don't want to miss any of the 32 interviews, make sure you like this video, click on that subscribe button to help you get ready for your fantasy football drafts. Kevin, we'll address the elephant in the room a little bit later in the video because we certainly have to. But I want to maybe start on a little bit of a positive end for Falcons fans, something that might get them a little bit excited. What does it feel like? What are the vibes like in the Falcons fan base about being freed from the jaws of Artie Smith and his sometimes bizarre game planning? You were never afraid to criticize Arthur Smith on game day on your Twitter account and on your podcast. What's the vibe like, or at least what was the vibe like with getting rid of Arthur Smith and kind of washing your hands of that guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think people felt freed from it. I mean, it's hard because you like Arthur Smith on a personal level. I think he got a bad rap for his press conference clips, but if you were actually in the room, he was typically nicer than you would expect, and definitely had a connection there with the media, and I think he was trying his best. But yeah, the offense was frustrating. I think he'd clearly run out of ideas, and it seemed like it was just a little overwhelming for him. And obviously, when you miss on quarterback too, that just compounds the issues. So yeah, it felt like we had a weight lifted. And when you go from Arthur Smith to, arguably the hottest, young offensive coordinator coming up through the ranks, and Zach Robinson, it definitely gets you excited, especially when you see what the Rams offense has been doing the last couple of years. And it's a huge change, right? Because the Falcons under Arthur Smith ran 11 personnel, the least of any team in the NFL, and the Rams ran it the most of any team in the NFL. So going to be a little bit of change coming to Atlanta in terms of the personnel at the very least.
I'm one of those fantasy in bio guys, right? That's the new you live in your mother's basement insult in the Twitter and social media world. So it was very easy for me to sit there and say, oh, here goes Arthur Smith going off about fantasy football again. And we're frustrated because Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson are getting the ball instead of Bijan Robinson. But from a Falcons NFL standpoint, what frustrated you the most about Arthur Smith's play calling, and what were some of the things that you thought maybe we gave him too much of a bad rap for?
I mean, to me, the most frustrating part was definitely how they utilized. I guess it was two things, the utilization of Kyle Pitts. It was just nowhere near enough. He just seemed like a complete afterthought in the game plan. And then the division of carries, and not even Algier. We know Algier's good. So it's not like giving carries to Algier, especially in short yardage, is a bad thing. But you just drafted Bijan Robinson. So why did you draft Bijan Robinson if you wanted to have a committee? There's not really a point to that. And of course, the comment about, oh, we're saving him. I guess you're saving him for Hawaii because, it's not like you're making the playoffs with that utilization. But, to me, it was more like they just refused to do anything with Bijan other than outside zone. It was just if Bijan was on the field, it was going to be outside zone, and teams just knew it. That's how you get a team that ostensibly improved their offensive line with the addition of Matthew Bergeron. That's how you get a team that actually loses rushing efficiency, despite adding the best running back in the draft and maybe in several years. You get worse in the run game, and it's because you're completely predictable with how you utilized your running backs. And just watching Bijan run outside zone every single play was pretty frustrating. And then Kyle Pitts, it's apparently his injury was the after effects were more severe than was publicly made available. That's, I guess, not entirely shocking because NFL teams do that all the time. But again, it's you spend a premium pick, you pass on quarterbacks, and maybe in hindsight that's the right call. Now that we know what's gone on with Justin Fields, but you make that guy the crown jewel of your first draft class, and it just seems like ever since 2021, Pitts has basically been an afterthought in the offense. And, I don't understand why you emphasize that position to such an extent. I mean, obviously he loves using tight ends, but Jonnu Smith was getting the majority of the work instead of Kyle Pitts at certain points. So I refuse to believe Kyle Pitts is bad. So I'm just going to blame Smith for that.
Let's keep going down that angle. We just had a meeting talking about our season long projections up at FantasyPoints.com, and one of the players we spent a lot of time on was Kyle Pitts. And one of our staffers, Graham Barfield, thought he said, "Guys, I got to be honest. I did not think Kyle Pitts was moving the way we know Kyle Pitts can move." Do you agree with that assessment? And also, do you think that's just permanent at this point? It sounds like you lean more to the positive side because you said you refuse to believe he's bad.
Yeah, I think it was recovery from multiple ligament tears in the knee, and it wasn't ACL type stuff where he was like, I can't play, but it was like, I don't trust it. And I think you could see the flashes of the athleticism still there, but the on a play-to-play basis, it wasn't there. I don't know if he was dealing with after like lingering pain. I don't know if it was like stiff or what, but absolutely it looked like he didn't quite have the same movement skills. And I know a lot of fans accused him that he was just being lazy, like, oh, he's just running lazy routes. I never thought that was the case. But I guess we'll have to see if it's permanent or not. I mean, I don't think it is. That type of injury shouldn't be a permanent type of thing. But maybe in hindsight, the timeline of recovery, we were everyone's trying to be hopeful with it, and to the Falcons' credit or not credit, they completely downplayed the injury and its severity basically the whole season. So at this point, I'm not. I think this is the year where Kyle Pitts really needs to show it. I mean, I think he can absolutely come in and have a big impact this year and get back to where people thought he was after his rookie season. It feels like people just forgot he had the rookie season altogether, and they're like, oh, he's just a bust. He had 1,000 yards as a rookie, and that's just a couple years removed. So he's got to do it now to sort of get back on the horse. But I think some people have already written him off like, oh, he's a bust. But if he has another 1,000-yard season this year, like everyone's gonna be like, okay, well, he's great. Yeah, he's back to being great. Okay, so the story is still being written with him. I'm thinking that given other stuff in the Falcons offense, it's pretty clear that they want to make him a focal point because they just didn't add that much else in the offense. So I have a lot of faith in Kyle Pitts. I think that fool me once, I guess, and I'm going to keep getting fooled again by Kyle Pitts. That's one guy that I'm just going to plant my flag on and hope eventually I'll be right. So
if Kyle Pitts comes out and has the kind of season that in theory you think he can have, the easiest and maybe the correct assessment is going to be he just needed to get away from Arthur Smith. What are the new coaches, Raheem Morris, and what are they saying about Kyle Pitts and his role in the offense going forward?
Yeah, I mean, the line from the coaching staff has been like, he's going to be a focal point, basically. Like, he's going to be a primary part of every single passing play. Like, we want him to be one of our like top options. He's going to be utilized that way. We want him to be utilized that way. And there's a lot of, we don't really know what the offense is going to look like. I think we can speculate that it's going to be similar to what the Rams run, but we'd never really seen, I think, outside of a couple preseason games, what Zach Robinson actually calls, and was he restricted by what the Rams did and actually wants to do some other stuff. I assume there will be some changes to what the Rams have done, but Kyle Pitts, I think the most interesting thing with his usage is, do they utilize him more as a receiver, or do they keep him in the traditional tight end alignments? I know Arthur Smith was very reluctant to ever play Pitts outside. I think that's still something that he can do on occasion. I know he's going to play the slot. I think they're going to limit his inline snaps quite a bit. That's why they signed Charlie Warner. I think they're like, we're not going to ask Kyle Pitts to block like half the time he's on the field. Like that's not why he's here. So I think we're going to see Pitts involved in a lot more plays. And also I think he's going to be lined up as a receiver most of the time and not necessarily an inline tight end.
So one of the things the Rams certainly did and have done under Sean McVay, and it's not necessarily been one guy year after year, but they use a bell cow back. It was Kyron Williams last year. At times it was Sony Michel, obviously dating back to Todd Gurley, and then they went to CJ Anderson and Darrell. They kind of go through these guys, but outside of the first year of Todd Gurley before he really got hurt, they never had somebody with the pedigree of Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson for fantasy football right now, underdog fantasy drafts, dynasty, everybody's back in. He's a first round pick. His ADP is like RB2 in best ball drafts. Do you think that's fair? And how do you expect him to be used in the Zach Robinson offense?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this team is gonna. Based on what we know about the Rams' offense, I would expect Bijan to be the bell cow back. I think this is one of those rare offenses where you get that type of back. And I think they understand. Like, we spent a top 10 pick on this guy. We need to maximize this player. Like, we can't sit here and pretend that we're going to make this a committee. And like, again, Algier is a good player and there's no reason he can't take some snaps, but I think you shouldn't be game planning to have Algier in the offense. It's always nice to have him at, like, I would like, if you've got Rum, I mean, I think he's always a good stash, because I think if they do this bell cow thing and Bijan does have to miss time, Algier is going to be a must start, in that case, when Bijan's out of the lineup. But I think we're basically going to see the Falcons just funnel it through Bijan in the run game. And I think we've seen what he can do in the passing game, and they're going to continue to, expand his role there. He's just so special once he gets the ball. And we saw he's kind of like a natural receiver that isn't like a polished receiver. Like, you could tell he's a natural hands catcher with how he was just snagging those things with one hand. But when he actually had to like run some deep routes and things like that, it was like he didn't know exactly how to do like an over the shoulder catch or things like that. Like that, he would almost try to like prefer to catch it with one hand, because that's just, he's just kind of a natural. So I know they're working on that type of stuff with him and trying to really like finish out his entire skill set, so he can become this primary back. But one thing we do know from the Rams is that they've evolved a lot from the days of just being a zone running team to where they're now a very multiple run scheme offense. And even last year, I think they ran more man at times than they did zone. So I know people are like, oh, well, Bijan's just a zone scheme. No, like, Bijan can do any run you want. Like, he's not limited. And I think Bijan, in some man gap stuff to the inside, could be very dangerous, if he just gets past those first defenders. And the Falcons have a physical offensive line. Like, yes, they're super athletic, but there's no reason they can't do man gap style runs too. So I think the variety of the run game and that sort of stuff is going to help so much, just because teams can't sit on the outside zone every single play and just know it's coming.
All right. I wanted to kind of butter you up a little bit, let you get in here nice and
Talk
easy.
Talk about Bijan, Kyle Pitts, my guys.
All right, let's keep a little bit of a focus on fantasy first, because I think the fantasy community in general is excited that the Falcons signed Kirk Cousins, because Drake London's a second round pick, locked in. We expect him to get a lot of targets. Cousins always peppers his guys. But there's obviously, something else going on here. Kevin, you were going through it on NFL draft night, round one, and I know you've had a couple of weeks to simmer on this, but here's a tweet from you the night the Falcons, or the night after the morning after the Falcons drafted Michael Penix, and you slept on it. The boldness of the Falcons gambit with Penix is astounding. This regime has to be confident that they can win without contributions from their top 10 pick over 2024 and 2025. They could smooth over any quarterback drama, which I think is an underreported angle, because these are actually people who play. And 3, they'll still be around, meaning the regime, to see Penix play in 2026. It is wild. I still agree with you. I think it is a wild gambit. Very clearly, they love the player. With 2 weeks to sit on it, what is your best assessment of the Michael Penix selection for the Falcons? And have you gone into coping mechanisms yet with the draft pick?
I think Falcons fans want that from me. That I think people are starting to get angry when they realize I haven't really changed my tune too much. And it's like, the quarterback pick is always this. Like, if you hit on the quarterback, then it's worth it, right? If Penix becomes a franchise quarterback, then it's worth it. It doesn't really matter what else it is, especially like when you look back and say, well, we gave him a top 10 pick and we didn't maximize his rookie contract for 2 years. But if he's a franchise quarterback, that's cheap. That's a cheap price to pay for a franchise quarterback, because you didn't have to trade into the top 3. You didn't have to trade multiple first round picks for someone like a Lamar. You're not paying huge salary caps. So it can be a win, like, if this works. And ultimately, I think this is just a big overreaction to their failures in Arthur Smith's regime. But also, this is what Raheem Morris wanted when he pitched the Falcons in 2021 to be. He was the interim head coach in 2020. I think he was never going to get the job, unfortunately, just because that's how this works. But when he interviewed in 2021, his main thing was we need to get a succession plan for Matt Ryan. Like we need to do that now. We can't wait. And then of course, what did the Falcons do? They did not get a succession plan for Matt Ryan. They took Kyle Pitts, and then Matt Ryan left the team the very next year because of their dalliance with Deshaun Watson. And then of course they struck out on Deshaun Watson, which thank God. And then they went with Desmond Ridder. That did not work at all. They went with Marcus Mariota. That did not work at all. Taylor Heineke came in. That did not work at all. It's like, wow, none of these quarterbacks are working. Maybe it has more to do with the offense than just the quarterbacks. But either way, like, I think they were like, we're not going to be caught without a quarterback again. Kirk Cousins is 36. He's the same age right now that Matt Ryan was in 2021 when he started his decline. I think the plan was Kirk Cousins is here to win games right now. Like, I think most people, and myself included, assumed when they signed Kirk Cousins that they were going to go all in to win, because that's what you do when you sign a quarterback to like a $45 million a year contract. They're not doing that, I don't think. And I think if you look at their draft and their offseason, it's pretty clear now that they're not maximizing this roster. They're keeping their cap healthy. They're not, they're going for future focused picks. This is now I like to call it a mini rebuild. I'm sure the team would hate that, and fans hate it when I say that, but I think the new window for this team for Super Bowl contention is 2026. But what Kirk gives you is he gives you playoff relevancy and probably 10 plus win seasons over the next 2 years. Yeah. And that's basically, my takeaway. He's the most expensive bridge quarterback of all time. He's probably also the best bridge quarterback of all time. But like this, I think this front office and this team realized they can't do another rebuild right now. The fans are so desperate to win. The Falcons haven't made the playoffs since 2017. They haven't had a winning season since 2017. So it's been an enormous amount of time. I think last year you could just feel apathy setting in from fans, and that's the worst thing you can have. Like, if fans are pissed off or if they're excited, at least you're getting engagement and people are showing up and care. Towards the end of last season, fans just didn't care. They're like, well, we've seen this story before. 7-10 again. This team's just not good. So I think Kirk Cousins was a way that they were like, we can win games we can win this division with Kirk Cousins. And the NFC playoff race. I mean, who the hell knows what happens there? I mean, you saw the Eagles lose in the first round, like the Cowboys lost in the first round. There's a lot of teams that are vulnerable, so you could get lucky and win some playoff games. Are you really a Super Bowl contender if you don't maximize this roster? I don't think so. But I think fans in Atlanta would be happy with winning a playoff game each year over the next 2 years. Like, I think that's the goal. And then when you get to Michael Penix in 2026 is, I think, when this team is hoping to turn the page and start to go all in for Michael Penix's window, which will be 2026, 2027, and 2028, I guess. But if he's still the quarterback in 2028, you have to imagine he's playing on some sort of extension, and we'll see what the cap ramifications are. But you could have one, quasi cheap year with Penix in 2026, because you're going to be eating at least like $17 million in dead cap from Cousins that year. And then you do get one cheap year in 2027 where he's still on a cheap rookie contract. So there's a window there. But I think it was shocking, considering that we all assumed that this was a win now team going into a win now situation that was just waiting for this draft class, and then they were going to pounce and add free agents. And instead they took Michael Penix, who I do like. Like, if you're going to bet on if you were going to bet on a quarterback between Penix and Bo Nix and these other guys, like, clearly Michael Penix is the one that actually has the ceiling of a top 10 quarterback. Like, if Michael Penix can sort out his issues and can stay healthy, he's clearly got some elite traits, and people forget he was a dual threat quarterback before he got hurt. Like, this is a guy that has some tremendous movement skills. I think at his pro day, he ran in the 4.4s. Like, he's a very good quarterback prospect. He just has those warts that you're worried about. But if it does work out, he's the one probably to bet on of the bunch that were available at 8. So could it work? Yeah. I still think it's really bold. And I think, you're basically telling Cousins, like, we're not really going to be maximizing this team. Like, they're betting on so much on the young players. Like, they're like, we're going to coach up these young guys. We're not really going to maximize our cap this year, where we're going to keep the cap healthy going forward. And Cousins, like you said, with the quarterback drama, that's also why they pick Cousins, because they know Cousins is a professional, and he's too much of a nice guy to hold it against anyone. He's just like, I don't know. Like he's just I think that's his personality, that he will just get over it and try to win. But definitely a like I said in the tweet, it's a bold decision, kind of astounding that they were wanting to gamble in this fashion. But um, ultimately, you got to get the quarterback right. Like that's the end. That's the story. And if they get the quarterback right, even if it takes a few years, no one's going to be mad in 2 years. No one's going to care. If they miss on Penix and then they never really do much with Kirk, then they're going to be fired by the time Penix plays. So
Yeah.
they got to win over the next 2 years, or they're not even going to see Penix. So that's probably what Kirk's about.
I believe the line between bold and bullshit is very, very thin. Kevin, before I let you go, this is a fantasy football podcast. Obviously, we've talked about the star players, and the thing is the Falcons have quite a lot of them in theory. But they made 2 other acquisitions at the wide receiver position this offseason. You said at the beginning of the show you expected them to play a lot more 11 personnel. So Darnell Mooney comes over in a free agent contract, somebody who Kirk Cousins has seen from the opposite side of the field in the NFC North the last couple of years. And then, of course, the Desmond Ridder trade to Arizona brings back Rondale Moore, who I think to this point in his career has been much better in theory than in reality. What are your expectations for those two in a team that you expect to run a lot of 11 personnel?
They're going to play a lot. And with Kirk Cousins out there, you have to think the passing volume is going to be a lot higher. I'm not familiar with where exactly the ADP on these guys is, but I think with Mooney, he's probably going to be more of a boom bust guy. But they say they want to use him all over, but I feel like he's going to be your deep threat guy, that's going to perform more like your typical deep threat guy. That's like he's probably going to get 3 to 4 catches, and if one of those is a deep touchdown, then he's going to have a great week. And if it's not, then he's probably going to have an okay week. So he's probably like a good flex player, just because he could always have a big week, maybe a wide receiver 3, depending on how much passing volume and how successful this is. Rondale Moore is like the big wild card because he's going to be their slot starter. They've talked him up a lot. They're like, look at all the advanced metrics. Rondale Moore like leads the NFL in separation per route run and all this stuff. And like, that sounds great. I just like, he's never had more than 450 yards. So I don't know what to expect, but he's going to be the slot starter. They didn't really add any competition for him. So I think he's locked into significant snaps and targets if he can stay healthy and all that. So Rondale Moore might be the one to target late as just like a dart throw, see how he looks in the offense for the first 3-4 weeks, and then cut bait, or maybe you've got something there. The one I will say, like later, Casey Washington is the only receiver they added in the draft over the last 2 years, and by all accounts, he is an ascending player. I don't know that he's someone that's going to challenge for a major role, but I think Casey Washington in Dynasty, for like your 5th round Dynasty rookie draft pick, if you want to stash him, I think he's a guy that they like, that I think could be someone that's in line for a bigger role in time. So he would be super low cost, and there's just not a lot of competition there. Like if you look at that type of that late in the draft, like he's probably Drake London's backup. Considering they just don't have a lot of big receivers. So if London goes down, Casey Washington could take on a much larger role. And, not going to be Drake London-esque, at least not, for a while, but it could be startable at that point.
Just so everybody's aware, currently on Underdog Fantasy, Darnell Mooney's carrying a 13th round ADP, and Kirk Cousins is a guy who's peppered his receivers in the past, and Rondale Moore virtually undrafted. His name is Kevin Knight. He's from the Falcoholic and the Falcoholic Live. Follow him on Twitter at Falcoholic. Kevin, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Kevin. Thank you so much for recapping your personal traumas with me. It is always a thank you for opening up. You're wearing your heart on your sleeve.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.